Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's Rick, and today we have Alissa Schepisi, who's the Edelman Executive Vice President of Employee Experience. So, Edelman is a global communications firm that partners with businesses and organizations to evolve, promote, and protect their brands and reputations. So, we're really lucky to have her, and hopefully, we can get some free advice that she's giving to her clients for our community. Alyssa has nearly 20 years of communications experience with a focus on internal communications planning and counsel, employer branding, and change management. Some of her clients have included Motorola, ServiceNow, Genentech, Juniper, and Delta Dental. And previously, she also worked as a news editor for the Knight Ridder Tribune News Service. So thanks for coming on the show, Alyssa.
Really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to kind of dig in from like your very beginnings. Jack writes for Forbes. I'm also a journalist. Why did you want to become a journalist? Like, can you walk us through that career path?
Yeah, so I knew from an early age that I wanted to write, that I wanted to tell stories. And I was always a pragmatist, even as a child. And so rather than thinking, oh, maybe I'll be an author or a poet, I wanted something that felt a little more stable at the time, which was kind of the 80s and 90s, and that was journalism. So that's what I studied in college. I did learn pretty early on that while I love to write, journalism or being a journalist to me is more about the interviewing and kind of uncovering, sometimes asking the hard questions. And particularly at that phase of life, that was not what I was interested in doing. So I kind of quickly pivoted to editing. I was a copy editor, I was a news editor, which I really liked because I felt like that was more a role where you're helping to clarify, you're helping to ensure that the message is clear. And I think that was kind of what led me then away from journalism and more into first media relations and then corporate communications. And I think the way I've usually handled my career changes is kind of just making like small little pivots, looking at what's to the left or right of where I am now and figuring out, okay, what isn't working for me in this current role and what adjacent to what I'm doing feels like it would help solve that problem. And that's just kind of how I've evolved over the last 20 years or so.
Can you walk us through what that transition is like? What is media
Yeah,
relations and corporate
yeah,
communications?
absolutely. So, media relations is when you are working for a company and are interfacing with journalists to help them get the information they need to tell their stories. So, particularly, my first media relations role was with Rand Corporation. They are a research firm. And so, interestingly, it was really managing a lot of inbound media requests. So, it was people who wanted to have an expert speak on a particular topic. So they'd come to us if we, had a researcher that was expert in that. So it was helping our researchers at Rand really understand how to tell stories that can be fairly dense. And these are people who typically have a bit of an academic background, helping them understand how to make things simple, clear, and compelling. So that was a lot of the work that I did in media relations. Corporate communications, usually media relations can be part of a corporate communications function, but corporate communications often comprises more of that. It's government relations, it can be investor relations. It's really thinking about how does a company communicate with all of their various stakeholders. I did marketing communications at one point, so really helping my company's sales force think about how to communicate with customers and really kind of like sell the company's value proposition. But also, employees are a huge stakeholder for companies. And that was within that corporate communications environment. That's how I uncovered internal communications or employee communications. When I was interning for the company that I worked for 10 years, it was Nelco Company, became Ecolab. I interned with them in college and I was at a town hall, and there was an executive that was delivering a message that really fell flat. You could just feel the energy, like just kind of like deflate in the room. And at the time, I was doing marketing communications, and I turned to my boss and I said, like, someone should talk to that leader and help them understand how that is landing, and maybe how that message could be better delivered, or how the message could or should be different, just a different message altogether. And he said, that could be your job. That is a job here. And I was like, oh, okay. And once I got into that, I I never left. I've really been focusing on the employee experience, communicating with employees, or helping to kind of programmatically change the employee experience for, I guess, 15 years now. And it's really where my passion lies, because it feels like the most impactful way for me to be applying kind of the communication skill set to help people enjoy, or at least kind of feel more productive and comfortable and safe in the thing that they spend most of their waking hours doing. That really matters to me.
So how does it feel, Alyssa? Like you're in the epicenter now because everybody's talking about whether quiet quitting, quiet firing, the great resignation, all these trends are coming out there, which just a few years ago, we didn't really talk that much about it. So like, what are you seeing in the workplace? Are you seeing people who are disengaged, unhappy, angry, mental health issues, burnout issues? And then
Oh,
how do you
yeah.
help them?
Yeah. I mean, the last 3 years have been a lot. And it is funny, when I first started in client service at Edelman doing employee experience work, it felt like a nice to have for a lot of our clients. We really needed to sell the value of why
Yes.
would you want to invest in this, and that we don't have to make that
Because they didn't
argument
care in the
much.
past. They didn't get,
Yeah,
I didn't, like Rick, I don't know about you when you started working, but I can tell you as a Gen Xer, no one cared. If I like, they couldn't care less if I was burnt out, if I had, mental health issues. They didn't care about my emotional well-being. It like you never even talked about it. It wasn't even a thing. It wasn't like you
yeah,
ignored it. It's just no one even thought to bring it up. So
yeah.
I could, yeah, and coming out of the pandemic and during the pandemic, that's where I don't know about you guys, that's what I really saw. All of a sudden, these companies started taking it seriously. Go, we got to do something about it.
Yeah.
We got to help everyone out.
I think the pandemic, stepping away from that in-person grind of day-to-day work, doing more of our work in our home environment for so many people, I think that it led to a lot of reflection and realignment of priorities. And I think once people get a taste of, oh, I could be spending more time with my family. I can still do my job, but I can have a fuller life outside of work if I have more flexibility. And also, once companies demonstrated that they could keep doing it, they can keep doing good work even if you're not in the office. I think that really changed the power dynamic. And I hear a lot of people talk about, well, the power is swinging back to the employer as the economy gets tougher. And in some ways, that may be true, but I really think that there's been a fundamental shift toward the employee voice mattering more. Employee expectations are just higher now. And I don't think that we'll ever see a time when companies will have as much ability to ignore worker preference as they may have had before the pandemic.
I agree 100%. It's it's like the genie is out of the bottle where people realize where I don't know if a lot of people socialize and talk about it, but they internalize where you see loved ones get sick, loved ones pass away, people maybe you don't know but hear about succumbing to COVID, and they realize, oh my God, life is short. This is nuts. I don't want to keep schlepping in from New Jersey to New York, an hour and a half each way, coming home, not seeing my kids. That's nuts. I don't want to do it. I think you had this collective feeling, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Yeah.
And it's a big shift.
And I will say there are some people who, I mean, not even some, I would say there's a huge contingent of the workforce that either feels like they need to be in the office to be productive, or just finds that more fulfilling. And that's fine. I think the most important success factor for organizations when they're thinking about their approach to hybrid work, if work can be done in a hybrid way, is giving employees a choice. Um, we find that employees are most fulfilled when they have the choice of kind of where and when to do work. And that's not to say that companies can't have, policies about, we want you to be in the office on certain days, or, kind of a certain amount of time per week. But still giving employees the choice of, okay, which days, which times, how do we work together? How do I get work done by myself versus when I collaborate? That's really what matters from an employee satisfaction perspective.
I mean, I want to dig in there, right? Because in the last 2 years, we've kind of seen these like public blowups where companies they have a return to office plan, or they do a mass layoff over Zoom and it goes viral, right? And we hear about it later. Sometimes there's like back and forth with terms of policies. Can you walk us through what is happening on the executive or, internal communications or HR level? Is it because they're unprepared? Is it because they're just responding to employee preference? What exactly is going on there?
I think sometimes when companies make choices that really fall flat with their employee population, it's indicative of the fact that they don't have a continuous dialogue or a continuous listening mechanism. Typically, organizations that are really dialed into kind of current sentiment with employees, overall what matters to employees, they're less likely to make a large decision that faces a lot of backlash. But that also requires not just listening, but being willing to be responsive, being willing to consider whether employee sentiment can and should shift your decision making. And I think that's the other component, being willing to talk about why we're making this decision. A lot of times, part of why things fall flat is that there's no justification. And not only is the company not explaining why they're making a choice, but employees can't really find, like, no matter how they look at it, they can't really find a logical explanation for it. People understand that business is business and that sometimes means that companies have to make tough decisions, but they want to believe that the company is doing their best to respect their workforce. So organizations that have to make layoffs, that can say, look, we had our executives take a salary cut, we suspended hiring, we, did all of these things before we took this step because we don't take it lightly. That is the best way to handle a situation like that, because employees really feel like their contributions and their role in the company was valued. I think less information and less, you know, obvious justification for tough decisions is much harder to swallow.
Yeah, how do you get that? Listen, do you do like micro surveys or ask for feedback on a regular basis to your clients to say, hey, how are you? Are you happy? Do you feel you're challenged? Do you feel there's a growth, path forward? And then analyze that and speak with the senior, the C-suite executives to say, hey, they're not happy, they're disengaged, they're not involved, they're burnt out. And then and then do you put a program together? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of like the macro and micro of employee listening. So the macro is engagement surveys. Those used to be kind of a once a year thing. Now best practice is more of, kind of like quarterly pulse surveys. Those tend to be the same questions year over year. They're tied to kind of an engagement framework that looks at, do employees find purpose in their work? Do they have confidence in leadership? Do they understand how their role connects to the broader business strategy? Do they feel safe and supported? And so that's usually, there's a score often that they'll track. They can benchmark that against competitors in their industry. And probably most importantly, they put action plans together based on what the survey says, both at the corporate level, but then also drilling down to the team level when possible to really diagnose what are our issues and how might we address those. either programmatically changing a policy, a procedure, a way of working, or sometimes it's a perception issue, and that's where communications can be really powerful. Sometimes employees just don't understand something because they don't have enough information. And so communications can sometimes be the solution to the problem. So that's kind of how engagement is tracked at the most macro level. It can be as important or even more important to be doing that micro listening. So creating forums within the organization, preferably both kind of digital. So whether it's comments on intranet stories or forums or taking kind of visible Q&A in town halls so that people can see what questions are being asked and answered, or having coffee chats, interactions with leaders, and collecting all of that information and doing both some quant and qual analysis. So looking at what are the questions we're getting, what's the sentiment, like is it positive, negative, or neutral? And also like when we look at all of the comments on our intranet, you can do analysis to see, okay, when people are talking about culture, they are most often talking about culture in relationship to perception of leaders. So there's a lot that you can do to kind of diagnose those more specific problems if you're analyzing all the data that you have at your disposal. And again, that there needs to be action plans against that as well.
That's great. Rick, you know, this is relevant for blind and the folks on the platform. Now, what happens to people who, let's say, work for Meta or Twitter or some of these companies that are in the news, maybe because their stock price is just cratering? Is there kind of, would they ask you to come in almost like crisis control to say, hey, here's what I know your stock price, you know, you were hoping for these options and these stocks, so you're going to make a fortune, maybe not, to keep them, you know, from either jumping ship or just getting depressed? You know, is that something that you're now seeing? You're getting engagements for that, say, hey, you got to help us out here.
Yeah, we have some clients that pull us in. Sometimes if it's actually a public crisis, then our crisis team from Edelman will pull us in to help with the employee kind of, you know, proactive reaction or reputation building. But sometimes people just come to us from an employee experience perspective with an urgent pain point or problem. I think that's when it's most important for communication leaders, both kind of those who are in-house and those who are coming to an agency, those in an agency, um, to really put on the diagnostician hat and to really think through, okay, is the problem really this thing that feels like it's on fire? Is that the right problem to solve? Because I think communicators at the heart are problem solvers, but the most successful ones really understand what is the right problem to solve. So is the problem that people are upset because the stock price has cratered and like now they're not getting as much money as they thought? I'm sure that's part of it. But would that lead people to jump ship if everything else in their employee experience was working really effectively for them? The employee experience is, you know, a multi-dimensional thing. People don't stay or leave for only one reason. There might be a lead domino, but there's a lot of factors at play. And it's usually once multiple factors start to kind of go south that employees really start to think about leaving. So whether that's I am not only not getting as much money as I thought, but I also feel like I don't see a clear career path. I don't see a lot of upskilling opportunities. I don't feel like this is a very collaborative environment. I don't think that our work has purpose. All of those are things that can help contribute to people leaving.
I find that really interesting, right? Because blind, we have kind of like a love-hate relationship among PR folks, HR folks, right? And one thing that I always give the advice is, if you're seeing your employee base turn to blind, like that is an internal communications channel, right? If there's something going on fundamentally at that company, and so I always recommend, a lot of PR folks, they reach out to me, ask me for advice, PR person to PR person, like, what do I do about blind? And I always tell them, like, actually go on with the app, right? It's very easy to dismiss it and say, oh, it's just all the haters or all the people that are upset. Uh, but really kind of, again, be a diagnostician, right? And
Hmm.
figure out, okay, I'm seeing certain trends, or a lot of our employees are actually turning to Blind to ask questions, right? We saw that a lot at the beginning of COVID.
Hmm.
People were asking, "Oh, my office is telling everyone to go home for 2 weeks. My office is 1 month. What is going on there, right? What is a stay-at-home order, or how do you be effective working from home?"
Yeah,
Uh, and so I really find that quite interesting, right? Where everything is really all connected, and there's not just a single thing that's really kind of, it's very easy to just blame one thing, but often case it's not the case.
Rick,
absolutely.
what do you see, Rick, when let's say somebody's working for a company? Let's take Meta, and not to pick on it, at all, but just as an example, because just last night and after hours, the stock cratered, going down again. Are you seeing people saying, "Hey, I'm going to leave," or asking on the platform, "Should I leave?" Are you seeing more of those kind of conversations taking place?
I mean, I think it goes back to what Alisa is saying, right? Where there's certain people that are, very upset that their total compensation, their pay is decreasing, but it comes against the context of maybe the company is shifting to the metaverse and your team has been reorganized and you're unhappy with your new manager, your new team, or perhaps you feel like you don't have direction in terms of what my role is going to translate, or how I'm going to best be able to do my job. We also have some folks that are saying, oh my gosh, I'm nervous about this kind of stricter performance plan that's coming along, right? So there's this like confluence of events of, we're reading the news articles that say managers are identifying people that quote unquote need extra help, right? And is that a code for quiet layoffs? Is the new term,
Yeah.
right? And so all of these things, they compound, and I mean, I guess to Elisa's point, like this could be solved with great internal communications, right? With that clarity or with focus of saying, oh, actually, no, like we really perhaps want to identify folks that need extra help because we've realized in the last 2 years we haven't done a great job, right? Everyone's been working from home.
Yeah.
Or maybe this is why we're doing a reorganization. It's not like a code or a secret way to do layoffs, right?
I think your point about, people sometimes short-sightedly dismissing discussion on blind, like, it's just the most negative people, it's people who complain. My counter argument would be, yes, sometimes people like to blow off steam, but in general, people want their voice to be heard. And they want their voice not just to be heard, but also for it to be consequential, for it to make an impact, and for kind of a complaint to be addressed. And I really feel like the companies that have the best employee listening mechanisms and also have a culture of safety and of, like, there's no retribution for having a critical opinion of something that we are doing here, they're going to want to speak up in the space where their voice will make the greatest difference for them. And that to me is speaking directly to your leaders. I find that people tend to go anonymous and outside when that feels like the most productive channel. And so I do think that, to your point, like, it is an internal communications tool. Bring it in house. Have that dialogue behind your firewall so that you can address it before it threatens to have a reputational impact.
Right. I mean, I love telling this story, but we have about, I believe, 3 out of 4 Uber employees are on the platform.
Hmm.
And in the last, 5 years, that company has been through so much. And we've kind of seen them go through almost every phase on blind, right? First, um, when all of the like workplace culture issues started coming out, we saw signups, like hundreds of employees sign up on uh, blind every single day.
Wow.
And what the company did was they decided to shut it off, right? They tried to block the emails, they tried to block going on blind from the company Wi Fi. And then it started, like hundreds of people started signing up every hour in response, right? And so it became something you couldn't, you know, hide your head at the sand. And now Uber heads of engineering and executives, they're going on blind and looking at what are the questions going to be for the next all hands. They're doing, ask me anything sessions within blind. And they're actually saying like, oh, my employees are going to be here. They're going to pop off or they're going to ask these questions. I might as well get ahead of it and actually meet them where they are.
Yeah.
So it's been crazy to see the 180 there at Uber.
That shows a lot of trust and respect, like mutual trust and respect. If you're willing to have your employee dialogue external, if you're willing to have a Q&A on blind, that
That's pretty
shows that
brave,
you,
right?
yeah, it
Yeah.
is. I mean, but that indicate that to me, that's an employer extending trust, which is more likely than for them to get it in return.
What are the kind of tips that you give your clients when they're going through a tough spot? Or I noticed one of your specialties is change management, which is this like team reorganizations, potentially layoffs, those kind of situations. What's your best advice?
I think particularly when there's a lot of advice, but I think our US CEO Lisa Ross told a client once, um, kind of like lead from the heart, but have thick skin. So and part of that is as a leader of an organization, you are a person, you're human. So kind of acknowledge your own humanity and acknowledge it in your employees as well. So explain why you as a leader are making a particular choice. Talk about kind of how that choice affects you, how you know it affects other people. Um, and be willing to kind of stand in your conviction. We know that we see this a lot with there's a lot of pressure from employees for having leaders take a stand on societal issues. And you have some leaders who are kind of wanting to understand, well, what should my position be? And that's a dangerous game. We see the most success with leaders that really know where they stand. They speak from a place of conviction. They know that not every employee will agree, but they're committed to creating a space for civil discourse. They're committed to supporting people with opposing viewpoints. And that's really, that again is how that trust is formed. And Edelman studies trust. We have the trust barometer. And there's a kind of, once trust is so high between employee and employer, we look at it as resilient trust, where you could take a reputational hit as a company, your stock could plummet and your employees could lose money. But if the trust is already high, they'll not only kind of stay with you through those tough times, but will be more likely to positively advocate for you as well. And I think that there's a little bit too much kind of dehumanization during difficult moments where a particular leader won't own a decision. It kind of just like you stand behind the corporate entity is doing this, and also not acknowledging the human impact of a decision. So really being willing to own it and kind of stay, I think, like in connection and in human connection with employees during those difficult times is what leads to the best outcomes.
I mean, where does that kind of tendency come from where you see these executives want to hide behind the company structure, or they get really robotic, or they start to use almost like this like legalistic language? What is going on there? What is that kind of
I think it's fear. I mean, like
okay.
it is hard to be a visible leader. And I think, when sometimes when you look at anonymous comments, you understand why, because people are calling out leaders by name as if those people don't have feelings. And so,
Right.
and so I feel like that it's unproductive in both directions. So if you're not acknowledging the humanity of your leader, that's going to most likely lead to a reaction of, well, then I'm going to armor up. I'm going to have a defensive response. I'm not going to be willing to be vulnerable or admit if I've made a mistake or admit that I want to now go in a different direction because I've learned from something and I want to do better. Um, that takes a lot of courage. And if either leaders just don't feel comfortable expressing that level of vulnerability in their professional life, or if the environment is kind of just like mutually hostile, it would be really, really hard to not go back to kind of talking points, to not hide behind, an anonymous kind of corporate entity. You have to have that level of trust and safety. I think it's incumbent on leaders to be the one to create that and to extend that first. But I think that employees have to respond in kind.
We've seen so many executives kind of get in trouble publicly because they read a script or they go off script in some cases, right? On these Zooms or these like mass layoffs or like Twitter messages. Can you walk us through like what that war room is like when something happens and the inbound inquiries come in from reporters or even folks on social media? When they call you for an emergency, what goes through your mind? Kind of what's the first steps you take?
I mean, I think it's really about understanding. We want to understand, okay, what happened? What led to this? Is this, was this a human moment where you said something that, like, at the end of the day, like, you don't even believe that? Like, it just kind of came out and it landed poorly, and, that was like, you regret it? Or does this represent kind of a true view that might be unpopular? And so first, it's just understanding what is this? What's the problem? Um, but it's also understanding. I mean, it's kind of like the fundamentals of like what matters for just how to apologize well. Um, so first, I mean, just the way that you would in like your personal life. So it's understanding like if you have made a mistake, you need to acknowledge that sincerely. You need to acknowledge the impact of it, and you need to make amends. You need to kind of indicate, here is how we are going to do better going forward. That is the most important piece. And I feel like just from what I see of kind of crisis communications, that is the most successful thing, saying, we messed up. Here's what happened. Here's what we are going to change as a result. And then being transparent and kind of updating on that change on an ongoing basis. That is what's important to employees, to consumers, to anybody who's kind of in relationship with a company. They want to understand, they want to know that they are heard, and they want to understand how that will be avoided in the future.
That makes so much sense because it's just like in a personal relationship. You say, "Hey, I messed up. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I didn't realize this. I didn't realize that it was hurtful what I said." Because if you go in that direction, then it's hard for the other person to keep attacking you because, especially if you're saying it being genuine and
Yeah.
authentic, saying it, not just like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry," and not really meaning it, but by offering a sincere apology, it kind of, I think, diffuses the situation a little bit because then they realize, okay, this person isn't evil. This person didn't really mean to harm us. It just came out wrong, it came out awkward.
Yeah.
and let's give this person a pass. But maybe we'll still keep an eye out because maybe there's something we need to be concerned of, but it could help out. But let me ask you this, Alissa, do you see any new trends evolving as the economy changes? Like, are companies starting to say, we had hybrid, maybe we'll go remote, or maybe we were in office and we're going to go hybrid, or maybe look at a 4-day work week, or maybe put in flexible schedules so that if you have young children or you have to care for parents who are kind of sick and need some looking after, or other kinds of variations of a theme to say, hey, we know times are hard, we know inflation is high, and we know you're not getting as much money because it's eating into the cost of everything. Do you see them trying to, companies trying to put together certain things to make it better for employees?
I think so. In some ways, I think the best companies approach their employee experience and kind of their employer brand the way that marketers do. So they think about their talent pool through the lens of personas. Who are like the different kind of employee segments at my organization? Um, and sometimes, you have a varied workforce and you have to prioritize. So, what's my largest employee base, or which kind of segment of my employees is closest to the customer and therefore kind of the most critical in terms of, being a positive reflection of our organization, and really understanding what do they need, what are they asking for, and then as much as possible providing flexibility so that you are creating those options for both. That's why I think that companies, a lot of companies have gone full remote, particularly in tech, and if that works for their employee base, if they know factually like this is really kind of, this is meeting the needs of the employees, that's awesome. Really large organizations would really, I think, struggle to make that decision, because unless they have a very distributed workforce to begin with, if you've got a ton of people who are in the field, then corporate headquarters doesn't impact that many people. But there are reasons to be in the office. It can be critical to true ideation, communication, like really kind of creating things together. It can be so hard to do remotely. The other thing that can be hard to do remotely is training up younger workers. People learn through osmosis. And so I think that it's just understanding whether it's your hybrid policy, like are you in the office, are you remote? And if you are hybrid, what does that hybrid experience look like? To like better leave options, flexible hours, those are all important. It's important to understand what your employee base is looking for and to kind of understand the different segments. But it's also important to understand and to be able to articulate what your business needs. Why does your business strategy necessitate that you get good at hybrid work? Why do you always have to have a certain population of employees on site? People have to, like, I think a big piece of culture that is underappreciated is that culture serves the purpose of helping a company achieve its business objectives. Culture is a set of mindsets, behaviors, and ways of working that needs to be aligned with how the work gets done, with how the business is successful. It cannot be only about what employees want and need. So employees, when they're looking for kind of who's the right employer for me, it's knowing themselves and kind of what matters to them, but then also wanting to align with a company's, the culture that's driving that company forward. It shouldn't be only about the employee. It needs to be about how business gets done as well.
I love that you said that, Alissa, because the conversation usually is so binary. It's remote, it's hybrid, and from what you're saying, if I understand it correctly, it's like, wait, we got to look down. Maybe if the company has a call center, and during the pandemic or the immediate aftermath, maybe they don't want to be in a call center on top of each other, bringing on test. So in that respect, they may say maybe we should go remote, or at least have hybrid or something, so we're not all on top of each other. But then for others, it would, like you said, for younger cohorts, let's say Gen Zs who are just starting out their career, it may make sense for them to be in the office so they understand what it's like. They absorb the corporate culture, they could get a mentor, they get a feel for it. So I like what you say, because think about it, like every time you read an article, it's always remote, hybrid. It's not, they're not giving color, context, who should, like, how should it work? And maybe that is the best way to do, to kind of break it down to each kind of sector, what you're doing, what your job is, what works best for you. And that's more work, I imagine, for the leaders, but it's probably better off than just a blanket, here's how we're going to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Your work environment has always been about enabling the work to get done. So, and we know that the environment does matter. So let's think about what work needs to happen by whom and what's the right setting, whether it's at home and it's digital tools or in the office to make that happen.
This is going on a tangent, but can you both humor me with this?
Yep.
So have you seen it just the other day with Twitter? And this happens all the time. There's a video of somebody Twitter saying, here's my typical day. And their typical day, they're filming it. It's like, hey, they wake up at the crack of 10 o'clock, whatever, and they get into the office and they have their latte, and then they have this great breakfast, and then they go on the rooftop, and then they're going to this yoga room. And I'm watching, I'm like, I don't understand. Is this supposed to be maybe like a subtle recruiting thing to say, wait, work at Twitter, or you could fill in other companies that do the same thing. Like, what is that? Is that from a PR standpoint? Is this good? Is it cringy? Is it bad? These kind of videos?
I mean, if it's truly kind of just like a string of perks
Well, you've
like
seen it, right?
lined up
Right?
together.
You've seen all stuff that's it, right? It's not just
Yes.
me. You've seen these, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That feels very Instagram versus reality to me. If
Yes.
someone,
Right.
like I can see that being the video and then someone else who's literally like eating lunch at their desk, with their headset on, like, doing 9 things at once.
That would be a better video, by the way. That'd be a fun video to do, right?
Right.
The reality, like what's Instagram, what's real life?
Yeah. And I think I counsel clients all the time that the last thing that you want is a bait and switch. So you do not want to sell employees on basically, here would, like, that video to me sounds like here would be the highlights of 6 months of work where, like, hey, this one day you did a yoga class and like one day you rolled in late, but that's not reality. And if employees join because they think that's what it will be like and then they realize very quickly it's not, I feel like those are organizations that might have kind of a real like drop off at the 6 month mark, 6 to 9 month mark with employees, which is unfortunate. The problem is that too few company like if employees get to the 6 to 9 month mark, you've already made a significant investment in that employee relationship. And so to us, you kind of want to fail fast as an employer. You want people to know right away whether or not it's going to be a good fit in the long term. So you start that before they're an employee. You start that when you're communicating with prospective employees, giving them the real deal so that they know what they're signing up for. And then really kind of like, pulling back the curtain once they start so that they can then quickly assess, did I make the right decision? That's important. And, kind of only focusing on the flashiness is going to lead to, people feeling like they were sold a bill of goods.
Well, let me ask you, Rick, I don't know if you see this or hear this on your site. At the big tech companies, is there for some professions that maybe they're not working as hard as others, that they may not put in all the hours? How is it? Like, what do you say?
Yeah, we
Are
see
those
this
videos
kind of.
completely wrong, or is maybe there's some truth to it?
Yeah, I like to call it like gatekeeping, right? So there's a lot of gatekeeping that I see on Blind where you often have folks in like so-called technical roles and folks in like business roles or what they'll call like non-technical roles. And oftentimes you don't understand what the other team or the other person does. right? And so it's very easy to kind of make these like stereotypes and say like, oh well, like this marketing person is just having the fabulous day, eating her green salad and drinking
Yeah.
her green juice. I also get nervous when you see these like TikTok or Instagram videos, and they tend to be women in tech. And there's some kind of like underlying misogyny that I'm seeing, right? Of like, oh, does she belong in tech? Whereas, I'm the like big old like software engineer that's been like coding in a basement forever. And so we see this coming to come across on Blind, because on Blind there's folks of every gender, every company, every position, and you see that back and forth, that debate going on of like who, like, what is a tech job or what is work, right? I always like to tell people that they message me about going into PR, and I'm like, well, it's a lot of like researching and reading and writing. It's not just it's not Sex in the City where you're just having parties. It's not Scandal where you're just telling people like kill this story, right? Like there's a lot of behind the scenes, and it's often unglamorous, even for a coder or a product manager, right? Where you have this like fabulous product that you're launching, and you don't see the ugly part, so to speak. And no one wants to make a video about that, right? Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it is social media, right? So I think it's a very interesting dynamic. I think what is kind of uncalled for, or what I think is really crazy, is you see the messages that are like, oh well, Elon's gonna have a field day with you, or you deserve to be next in the layoffs. I think that's kind of not realizing what the whole goal of this like social media is for, right? Like very rarely do people post a unglamorous selfie. It's always when they're looking at their most fabulous, right?
Alyssa, so speaking of Elon, if let's say Elon called you up now and said, hey, I said that we're going to lay off 75% of the workers and, all the trash talking he's doing, what would you do to say to his employees or to him, all right, wait. Here's, before you do anything else, here's my advice. And maybe he'll be listening to this when we put it live. So is there anything that you would suggest for what the employees to do or not to do? Do they run for the hills and leave? Do they stay? Any comments, thoughts?
I mean, this is what I would say to any client. I would say um, to remember that it's a relationship and a dialogue. You know, a visionary leader is going to want to share their vision, and that's great and that's important. But in most cases, a visionary leader can't do it alone. And so there is an element of coalition building, bringing people along in the journey, explaining kind of, what your rationale is. And because it is a relationship and it's, there's two sides, listening is just as important as talking. And so when we have new leaders, when our clients, have a new CEO or a new leader, um, one of the most tried and true tactics is a listening tour. So having them go out and have coffee chats with employees, shadowing employees. Sure, they might have a town hall and they might kind of share their vision, but it's more important for them to really understand what's on an employee's minds and kind of what their pain points might be. Doing that for about 90 days, and then kind of using that 90-day mark to share what that leader has heard and basically reflect back. Here is how that will impact my leadership plan going forward. Here's what I'm going to do based on what you told me. That doesn't mean that you're changing your work style, your vision, your strategy, anything like that. But you can't be successful if your employees have an objectively painful experience. So it really is incumbent on leaders to have the right people on their team that can solve those problems. I also don't expect a CEO to know how to address kind of these like really specific employee pain points. But they need to surround themselves with leaders who know how to do that, and they have to trust them to and listen to them, kind of take their feedback for what needs to shift so that that leader can achieve what they're trying to achieve.
Now, bringing a sink into the office for the first day. Did you see that? Is that something you recommend for new CEOs to do? Is that a thing now? Is that the cool thing to do?
Or the
You
big
know,
foam
that was a
mirror.
first. Yeah, that was a first for sure.
So Edelson, that's not on the approved list to do. Like, okay, first day of going into the new
You know,
job,
there's no
bring a
approved
sink.
list. There's no approved list. We'd love to tailor to a leader. We love to allow them to kind of like be authentic. Um, but yeah, that was definitely I'd not seen that before.
I mean, one thing that I find so interesting about these like all hands is, right, like sometimes they can feel like super gimmicky, or it's almost like too rehearsed, right? And as an employee, where you're just thinking, oh gosh, like I can't ask a question because, maybe they won't pick it, or they're just going to blow me off and give me a non-answer. How does an executive or a company kind of rebuild that trust there, where kind of like a key component of your internal communications or your outreach to employees is just not being engaged with?
Yeah. I think we will do two things. One, often if the current format, whatever it is for bringing kind of employees and leaders together, if it's not working, changing the format. And that might seem obvious, but I think um, having an actual format change rather than just deciding we're going to show up to that same town hall format, but we're going to kind of now like be more authentic, um, I think can be hard. So I think finding a way to understand why was that not working? Why was the leader uncomfortable? And then changing the format so that they can get a little bit closer into their comfort zone. And then being honest about the fact that, hey, we're making this change because we want this to be more of a dialogue, or we want this to be, a more productive conversation. Um, and my experience is that it's a lot of working with leaders to, practice fielding Q&A, kind of like doing like presentation training around here's how to the right way to respond and not react to a question that might make you feel defensive. It's not about getting better at kind of pivoting back to your talking points. It's really about being a better listener, and being more open to those vulnerable moments in a public forum. I see so many leaders kind of I can tell that they're nervous, and they'll often say, like, if there's like a tech challenge, they'll often kind of like make a comment about like, well, sorry that this screen isn't working. And I know that that's when they are just feeling uncomfortable. They're kind of like, oh, they're like pointing out errors and they're blaming. Um, and so it's really working with them to kind of like remind them, you've got to stay in kind of comfortable listening mode here in order for this to achieve the right results. There's no point if it's going to just kind of disengage employees, there is no point in doing it. Just put out a video. I mean, if this is really meant to be a dialogue, it needs to be a dialogue.
Interesting. No, I've just been at so many companies, and you can see them change the format because they want to protect a leader or protect the company, or they know, something's not going to go their way, right? Like we've all been at companies where the day of they say, oh, we're not going to have any Q&A today, right? That happens to be the session where they announce like a performance review or something. Right?
Right. And I think, those are battles that we as communicators don't always win. We don't have ultimate say. It's really up to leaders. And sometimes they can say, like, I don't want to take questions. I just don't want to. And so we might lose that battle, but then trying to figure out, okay, well, if they didn't take questions, can we ask people to submit questions so that we can then kind of provide written answers later? Finding a way to still, you know, create some sort of back and forth, that might be more within the comfort zone of that particular leader.
And so like are there any other kind of like communications culture red flags that you want to tell our candidates about or our community about? You know, a lot of them are actively job seeking, and you know, they often find this like concept of company culture like very nebulous, right? Like, is it the perks? Is it the vibe that I have with my hiring manager? Is it something else entirely? Do you have any kind of guidance there?
I think it's helpful to think about culture as like the collective mindsets, behaviors, and ways of working. Culture is very important because it is kind of like the water you're swimming in, but it is not the only thing. Your relationship with your manager is huge, and that's a particular element of the employee experience, manager and employee relationship, leadership, and kind of your confidence in leaders, and are they driving the company in the right direction? Do they take stands on things that matter to me? That's a different component. Total rewards, which is like the HR term for all the perks and comp and all of that, that's important. Physical working environment, whether it's in office, hybrid, remote, that's important. Think about what matters to you. When, as a manager, I do a rewards exercise with my direct reports, like kind of when we first start working together, of it's like a list of 17 different rewards, tangible and intangible. It can be kind of like the respect of my colleagues, the amount of fun I have at work, the amount I'm paid, opportunities for promotion. And I have them rank order it so that I, right off the bat, get a better understanding of what matters to them. I often hear from team members like, I'd never really done that. I'd never really thought about that before. And that's, I think, so important for job seekers. Really understand what aspects of the employee experience and what kinds of rewards matter to you, and then be a heat-seeking missile looking for companies that obviously prioritize that kind of reward. If you know that if you're just so hungry to learn and you don't care really like about the salary, but then find the companies that have these incredible training programs. Like, know what you want and need and find the company that has that.
Got it. Or alternatively, if you're like many people on Blind, where you're just really incentivized by cash rewards and total rewards, there's certainly companies out there that do fabulously, right?
Yep, absolutely. Go there. But I do believe, like study after study shows that even when
It's the
people
psychic.
say
Mhm.
that that's what matters most, behavior indicates that that's important, but not the most important.
Right. At some point, it becomes not worthwhile, right? We
Right.
see it all the time on Blind. Like, oh gosh, like I thought one thing about this company, and everything that I heard about it is true, and maybe it's not the right place for me anymore.
Yeah, there are some things, yeah, where money cannot make up for a really miserable experience. So,
Right.
yeah,
Oh my
definitely.
gosh. Well, thanks so much for your all your advice. We loved your stories and really appreciated kind of your guidance there. Thanks so much, Alyssa.
Yeah, thank you. It
Thank
was
you.
fun. Absolutely.
Excellent.